I guess we called item number 2 already, and joining us today on this committee is Supervisor Weiner, who's the author of this legislation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for hearing this item today, this resolution to try to move San Francisco toward open source voting system. Colleagues, as you know, our election system is truly the backbone of our democracy. Free and fair elections ensure that we as elected officials have earned the trust instilled in us by the public, and that the public can have confidence that those elections were conducted in an open and transparent and accurate way. We have a very, very strong Department of Elections in San Francisco, and I think we should all be proud of the work that the department has done. Running an election system is not easy, but I think it's important for us to always look for new ways to make things even better and to analyze all of our options. Today before us is a resolution in support of San Francisco working along with communities and organizations from around the state to make our election system even more transparent, more secure, and more publicly accountable. Currently, our voting system, our voting technology in San Francisco, which is consistent with voting technologies around the country, are somewhat of a black box, a system created by a private vendor with proprietary software that is unavailable for public review. Last year, State Senator, now Secretary of State-elect Alex Padilla, authored the successful Senate Bill 360, which provided regulatory relief by allowing counties to develop, own, and operate public voting systems. This important step opens the door for counties to develop open-source voting technology, which means that technology used to administer elections is publicly available and viewable, allowing for greater accountability and transparency. By following the open source path, we can ensure and be even more confident that our elections are conducted with total integrity and accuracy, and with less opportunity for fraud and more accurate results. Also, we can relieve ourselves of expensive proprietary hardware and software licensing costs, which would save millions of dollars. With open source voting technology, counties can use off-the-shelf hardware to run elections, which is much cheaper than buying hardware from private vendors. The question is, how do we get there? There's an important debate going on in the public realm about what paths to follow. And today we will be hearing some of the work that is happening here in California. We'll hear from members of the California Association of Voting Officials, CAVO, a statewide nonprofit that advocates for open source voting systems in California, and the importance of open source both as good government and also as cost-saving measure. We'll also hear about what paths San Francisco could potentially follow to implement its own voting system, including studying the process that is currently ongoing in Los Angeles County. Today before the committee, colleagues, is a resolution that expresses San Francisco's commitment to implementing and working with other jurisdictions and organizations to implement an open source voting system. The resolution requests that LAFCO study how San Francisco could implement its own voting system. And I will say we've spoken with staff at LAFCO, and they are able and willing to do this if requested by the LAFCO board. And Supervisor Marr has informed us that he is interested in adding his name as a co-sponsor to this resolution and in carrying that request at LAFCO, of which he is a member. These are important steps in creating a more free and fair election system that strengthens the public trust. Colleagues, if there are no additional opening comments, Mr. Chairman, we do have a few brief presenters. First, I want to invite up Alec Bash. Yeah, there he is. One of my constituents, Mr. Bash, followed by Tim Mayer, Brent Turner, and Brent Turner, yes.
Supervisors, my name is Alec Bash. I appreciate the opportunity to be before you this afternoon. From hanging chads in the year 2000 election to the shift over to electronic voting machines in 2004, which introduced their own set of issues with the secret source code, with the proprietary software systems that they all had. And that led to a number of issues where when people used a touch screen and they pressed a button for carry and it showed a bush or vice versa, because it happened both ways, then it led to questions about this. In 2006, there was a case in Florida, which I'd like to go into in more detail in just a moment. But after that, there was a hackers group called Anonymous that believed that they had intercepted an effort to flip the vote in Ohio in one of the last presidential elections, and that they had taken care of it because they had their own ways to follow secret source code. Most people do not know how to follow secret source code, and courts do not know how to follow secret source code. And a problem we have now is that after 2004, we have essentially the same systems that we have now for electronic voting systems. There have been a few patches here and there, but it's basically the same, and they are very pricey. They're under private control. We have situations like in 2004 where the owner of one of the electronic voting systems was heavily partisan in who he wanted to win the presidency, and in fact, his candidate did in the place where his machines were being used. So people have questions. So the virtue of open source code is that there's transparency there. There are people who can look at the source code, and if it goes to court, then people in the courts can look at the source code. And that brings me to the case I wanted to bring up in Florida, the case Jennings versus Buchanan. And after my testimony, I'll pass this analysis forward. It was actually written by, I have to say, the attorneys for the loser in this case. But what they said is the November 2006 congressional balloting in Florida's 13th was a model for how not to conduct an election. The final margin was less than 400 votes out of nearly 250,000 votes cast. But the candidate who officially lost came up short only because 18,000 congressional ballots, and here I will add my own comment, in the most Democratic-leaning county of that congressional district, cast on paperless electronic touchscreen voting machines in her home county turned up blank. People did not record a vote for any vote for anybody for Congress, 18,000 of these in one county. The ensuing litigation, both in state court and in the U.S. House of Representatives, demonstrate that about 14,000 of these 18,000 Sarasota County congressional undervotes, as they call them, the ballots with no vote for either congressional candidate, were likely unintentional, and that had those ballots been counted as they had been intended, the candidate who officially lost by nearly 400 votes would instead have triumphed by about 3,000 votes. And the article goes on. I will not continue reading, but suffice it to say that when it went to court, the courts ruled that they did not have the power in this case to look at the proprietary source code for the machines, that it was a trade secret, and that it had not been demonstrated that there was sufficient harm to violate a trade secret, in spite of the facts that I have indicated to you. So the effort for an open source code is to avoid exactly that kind of thing. Sure, one could try to pass laws saying that when there are election results you should ignore trade secrets and just go right to it, but it would be much better if we had an open source code system where it is designed in a transparent way, there are people who are able to review it in a transparent way, and people are able to proceed with the most sacred of American rights, the ability to cast a secret ballot for the candidate of your choice and to have it counted the way you wish it to be. So be pleased to answer any questions now or at the end of our testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bash. Next will be Tim Mayer.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Tim Mayer, and I sat on the San Francisco Voting Task Force. Thank you very much, Supervisor Campos, for that appointment. So this is basically a simple message in that the San Francisco Voting Task Force, its recommendation is for an open source GPL voting system. And so the resolution that we're asking to pass is the next logical step, and I'm hoping that you support it. Thank you very much as well. Supervisor Wiener, I just wanted to say that I'm a resident in your district.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Brent Turner.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Brent Turner. Cami Foote, unfortunately, because of the weather, could not make it today, so I have a statement to read after I read my quick statement. Again, my name is Brent Turner. I chair the election committee for the San Mateo County Democratic Party. I also chair the State of California Democratic Party Disabilities Committee on Elections, and I'm the secretary for the California Association of Voting Officials. CAVO is dedicated to providing the election administration community with best election system options. We advocate transparency via publicly owned software and the reduction of costs via commercial off-the-shelf hardware. Today is a special day, not only here in San Francisco because of this proceeding, but globally as well. The annual observance of the International Day of Disabled Persons was proclaimed in 1992 by the United Nations General Assembly. The observance of this day aims to promote an understanding of disability issues. It also seeks to increase awareness of gains to be derived from the integration of persons with disabilities in every aspect of political, social, economic, and cultural life. On that note, CAVO is endorsed by the Brennan Center for Justice, the Center for Women Policy Studies, the Equal Justice Society, the National Organization of Women, and to the above point, the National Federation for the Blind. Today's proceedings in San Francisco will not only ring bells of celebration for taxpayers who crave savings and security experts who strive to protect democracy, but also the disabilities community that has suffered the ills of the current failed voting system market. There are just a handful of voting machine vendors in the U.S. market, and that is not acceptable. The current voting systems have been issued scathing reports for poor security by government study. This is not acceptable. The current systems are known to be overpriced and poorly conceived. Good news is the technology exists for better systems that are publicly owned. Voter turnout is currently suffering from a lack of confidence in the current systems and will be bolstered by the announcement of upgrades as well as the convenience that technology can provide. Though the path does involve science, more good news, it is not rocket science. We can do all this now. The open source scientific community has been working on the plan for over a decade, and now it is a matter of political will. There will be cost and pain to transition to a better system, but nothing in comparison to the cost and the pain in standing still. Thank you all for your dedication for democracy. With that, I'd like to read quickly Cami Foote's message to be read into the record, if I could. Thank you. Honorable Board of Supervisors, in 2008, the City and County of San Francisco Board of Supervisors established the Voting Systems Task Force.
Mr. Turner, if I
Yes.
may, Cami Foote, she's the Inyo County Registrar of Voters, correct?
She is the Inyo County Registrar of Voters and the president of CAVO.
Great, thank you.
Yes, she's elected. Thank you. At the time and currently, the San Francisco Department of Elections was under a board-approved contract with Dominion Voting Systems, formerly Sequoia Voting Systems, for voting system services, one of only two vendors that responded to a request for a proposal to procure a new voting system. The report issued by the Voting Systems Task Force in 2011 recommended that San Francisco be an active participant in the movement toward more open and transparent voting systems. We acknowledge the complexity of moving from the existing marketplace toward more innovative voting systems and urge San Francisco to move steadily toward the goal of transparency, even if it must do so in incremental steps. We encourage the city to be a strong advocate in the private sector marketplace for more transparent systems and to be open as well to new collaborative developmental models. Significant changes have occurred to improve the voting system certification process in California since the Voting Systems Task Force was convened in 2008, primarily with the support of Secretary of State-elect Alex Padilla. Senator Padilla worked with Los Angeles County to author Senate Bill 360, passed in 2013. The law, as Supervisor Wiener stated, created a needed wholesale changes in technology models for new innovative systems to be certified in California. Additionally, the bill provided an incentive for counties to develop non-proprietary voting systems by allowing pilots of publicly owned non-proprietary voting systems by counties, whereas the initial federal and state voting system certification processes did not contemplate for publicly owned voting systems. Research has shown that the open source code provides, in many cases, a reasonable or even superior approach to using proprietary competitive software and is now being adopted by government agencies such as the Department of Defense and National Security Agency. Open source software run on community off-the-shelf hardware is the lowest cost, most reliable alternative to current voting systems. Reducing hardware costs from $5,000 single-use machines to $500 commercially available computers is just one example of the cost savings that can be achieved with this technology model. As equipment and software costs go down, capital is freed up to allocate to other areas of election administration. In addition to reducing costs, open source systems will increase transparency, another key recommendation of the task force. As pointed out in the report, numerous independent investigations have discovered serious security weaknesses and design errors in widely used electronic voting equipment. By designing software in an open environment, there is an increased chance that defects will be identified and addressed. On December 23, 2013, the California Association of Voting Officials, CAVO, was launched for the purpose of providing a mechanism for counties to pool resources to invest in the development and use of open voting systems for public elections, as well as to provide training, education, and management practices to election officials for the effective use of open source technologies. CAVO is a California nonprofit, non-stock mutual benefit corporation and is owned by the public for the mutual benefit of its members, which include individuals, voting jurisdictions, academic and research organizations, technologists, and service providers. Joining CAVO can further San Francisco goals of collaborating with other jurisdictions, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations to develop and manage the next gen of voting systems. By joining now, while development is still underway, San Francisco County can ensure that their unique election needs are incorporated into the system design and implementation. And finally, today, I ask you to join CAVO in our efforts to build better voting systems. Well into the 21st century, our technology advances should provide us the opportunity to ensure that everyone's vote is counted accurately and securely without being tied to a single private vendor or aging, outdated infrastructure. Innovation through open source development will provide us the capacity and certainty to administer elections for this century and keep the promise of our democracy, namely that your vote will always, if cast, count. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Cami Foote, President, CAVO. Thank you very much, and I'm available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. And then finally, I'd like to call up Chris Stradonic, who is a member of the Elections Commission, appointed by the Board of Supervisors.
Good afternoon, Rules Committee members. The last time I was here was back in April when I was applying for the Board of Supervisors seat. And again, thank you for your support. I'm now the Vice President of the Elections Commission, although today I'm going to be speaking as a member of the public and not as a representative of the Commission. I want to provide a little bit of background information to the resolution. It's something I support. Open source is an idea that has been talked about for quite a while now in San Francisco. Back at the last time the Department of Elections was procuring equipment, this is something that the Elections Commission discussed. And I believe all of you received a memo I circulated And if you pull that packet out, on the last page of it, you can see the text of the resolution that the Elections Commission passed back then. And I'll just read you one sentence from it. The language is quite general because this was in the early stages of the conversation, but it said, "The Commission adopts as policy that the election department shall endeavor in contracting to prioritize and select, if possible, voting systems and vendors which provide the maximum level of security and transparency possible, consistent with the principles of public disclosure." After that resolution, the Voting Systems Task Force was formed, and they made their own resolution, and that was in 2011. And now, where are we today? We're getting close to the time where we have to procure new equipment, but the problem is that there's still no open source voting system available. But we have seen some encouraging things in Los Angeles and in Travis County. They are starting to develop their own voting system. And my understanding is that the work they're doing is focused more on their own jurisdiction, so it doesn't seem like it's something that we'd be able to use in the near term. So, and that's why I'm particularly excited about the part of the resolution that asked LAFCO to study how San Francisco could lead an effort to develop our own voting system. And some of the, so it's kind of natural for LAFCO to drill down into the details and see what would this look like for San Francisco and what would it take. And some of the things that I think LAFCO would be in a good position to study are, what are the cost benefits of this? What department would be responsible for developing this system? What relationship would it have to the Department of Elections, or should it be part of the Department of Elections? Should San Francisco attempt to develop an entire voting system or just a component? Can it integrate with other systems? And how would we legally work with other jurisdictions and organizations, possibly private companies? Like, what would the legal framework for that look like? And lastly, how would we budget that over the years? And what sort of a timeline are we looking at? So I think that there are lots of good questions around this issue. I think it's something that is worth San Francisco pursuing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Okay, colleagues, those are the presentations. Mr. Arntz is here if anyone has questions of him. But really the goal of this resolution is to reiterate what this board has already said, that we want to move towards open source voting systems, but also we hope to have LAFCO study this so we can have some actual data and analysis about what it would take for us to move in this direction and what makes sense. So we look forward to working with LAFCO and with the department on that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that Supervisor Tang is on the...
Supervisor Tang?
Thank you. Just since Director Arntz is here, I just had one question to build on the public comment question that was brought up regarding timing. So I'm really glad that LAFCO is studying this. I think it's a really positive direction for our city to move in. But I did want to better understand, as we are going out to bid for future contracts for the city, what does that mean? Are we going to be only entering into one-year contracts at a time so that, if we're able to move on something, that we are able to do so? So if you could just shed some light on the timing, that would be great.
Yeah, timing and time will be critical for the department no matter which direction we go in the future. The structure of the contract, my prediction is whatever structure the contract assumes will be dynamic until it's executed. There's many avenues we could take as far as contracting regarding a voting system or the development of voting systems. The main thing, though, is for the department to, I think, explain, is that the current contract for the current voting system expires in December of 2016. So we have to start the mechanisms of going out to bid for another voting system, and that, or something to use to count ballots. It's not in any way a negative mark against open source, going out to bid. We're not trying to dictate how the direction that voting will take in San Francisco, but we have an obligation to make sure that we have something that'll count the ballots going forward to 2016. And right now, the only thing that would be available for us are the current types of systems that we are currently using. So again, it's just a matter of timing and time. How much time would it take for an an open source system to be developed, implemented for San Francisco to use. So those are the two of the main components for us. And as far as contract is concerned, again, I'm sure it'll be dynamic in how we finally end up structuring that agreement.
Okay, Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Just wanted to ask you, since we're talking about a resolution, a non-binding resolution, what impact does it have in terms of what it means for the department? I know there is a statement here that we pledge, and I really support the intent and the spirit of this, but I just want to have a better understanding of what that means in terms of the day-to-day.
Well, I don't know yet. I think it's a great first step to actually have LAFCO take a look at this and do the study. I think that's really the appropriate step for San Francisco to take in regards to open source, and I think it's a good idea to consolidate the information and the avenues towards an open source system by using via the study. Again, it's just time and timing for us. Right now we have more time available to contribute to a report, to respond to questions and things like that. As we get in closer to the election cycle, then the time is less for us. So right now, the time would be good for us to be involved in a study, but as we get closer to November 2015, the time will be less good.
And I know that we can't, tell LAFCO what it can do, but I certainly, as a member of LAFCO, would be supportive of studying this issue. I think it's a very important issue, and I think it makes sense that LAFCO would be the entity that considers this. So, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, colleagues, and I think, clearly we're not going to, if we do move towards open source voting, which I hope we will, it's not going to be in place, by the end of next year, which is when the contract comes up. And so I think the question will be looking at what LAFCO finds, how that contract should be structured. I think current contract, you've been doing 5-year renewals. Am I right about that?
No, we had 2 1-year renewals and a 1 2-year renewal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really the variable there.
Right. It is.
Okay.
And then also, like as Mr. Jordanek mentioned, and I believe it's also in your resolution, there's steps to take that potentially we could put in the RFP and bring components of open source into the next system, the next RFP for the next system, whatever it's going to be. I don't know. I don't want to stop into anything. So I think the department certainly has been aware of open source. We've taken small steps just in this past election, again with Mr. Jordanek's assistance, providing files with election results that are open, that you can read using open source scripts that were developed on GitHub. And there's many other avenues that we can take now, even before LAFCO commences or finishes its study, and also we can incorporate and also implement before that we get a new contract for the next voting system.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Arntz, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one public comment card. David Carey.
Thank you, Supervisors. My name is David Carey, and I want to speak in favor of this resolution, and also thank those who, including those of you who have been supportive of this issue and have been instrumental in bringing this forward here today. I wanted to speak very briefly about 2 things. One is to affirm the value of open source and open voting systems to improving our elections, and also to offer some kind of personal observations I've had about the need for improving public confidence in San Francisco's elections. I've been an author of free open source software, election related, that has been used to help verify the results of San Francisco elections, and on occasion offer some places where vote counts could be corrected, and that's been very helpful for people not only here in California but in other states as well. San Francisco elections and Director John Arntz do a very commendable job overall in the way they conduct San Francisco elections, and they continually work to make improvements. And there are still areas where they can make improvements. And as I've talked recently with San Franciscans about San Francisco elections and some of the areas where they can be improved, I have found that there is a very significant segment of the public that has a low level of confidence in San Francisco elections and how they are being conducted. And I think open source software and more open voting systems is certainly one of the steps that we can take to help improve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there any additional public comment on item 2? Seeing none, Mr. Chairman, may we close public comment?
It's closed.
Okay. So colleagues, again, thank you for hearing this item, and I would ask the committee to forward the resolution with positive recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Okay. With no objection, then the motion is passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues.